Hello and welcome to the Neuro-Rich podcast. I'm Maya.
And my name is Farshad.
And welcome to episode 3.
Doesn't matter, we're starting a new series.
Episode doesn't matter. New series time, baby. We're talking about a book. Why don't you introduce the book to us, Farshad?
Yes, so to start off this new series, we're going to be having a few episodes on the power of habits, specifically small, tiny habits. And we're covering the book named Atomic Habits, written by James Clear. So for this first episode, we will be covering chapters 1 to 3, the fundamentals of why tiny changes make a big difference. All right.
So the author is James Clear. What he does is he teaches people about habits. Basically what happened was he really liked baseball as a kid, and he got hit in the face with a baseball bat right between the eyes. Really hurt. He went to the ER. He had multiple skull fractures, broken nose, shattered eye sockets. And then,
And by the way, Maya is fastly going over this period, but this is a period that took Mr. Clear a few years to get over, and it was quite a damaging injury to him.
Well, of course it's a damaging injury. He broke like a bunch of bones. So, I mean, like it was a very traumatizing moment for him, especially.
Mm-hmm.
He went through this entire recovery. He had problems with he had eye problems, and he had eye problems. He couldn't smell. Like his life was basically hard for a long period of time.
He had to be put into a medically induced coma for months until he recovered and his brain stabilized, essentially.
Yeah, and then he just kind of he later went back to baseball, which I mean he decided to try to make the varsity team.
But most importantly, he became a varsity player in college, and that was where he really started to turn his life around. Because while getting into college, this allowed him to put the onus of responsibility on himself and try to get his life in order by building good sleeping habits, going to bed early, and keeping his college dorm in a sea of messy college dorms nice and tidy, right? So minor habits he built gave him control over his life. That's when he started to feel confident, and a growing belief in himself rippled through him as he went through classrooms with good marks and straight A's during his first year in college.
Then he goes on to describe these small things that he did, cleaning his room, as you said, Farshad. And at some point, starting at 2012, he started publishing articles about habits. He started publishing how he did, he basically experimented on himself with how habits work. And he started publishing these things, and over the years, up until 2016, 2017, he was booming. He got incredibly popular with his articles. Articles appeared on Time, Entrepreneur, Forbes, and it reached over 8 million people just in 2016. So he wrote this book in about 2018, and then he goes on to draw upon the scientific field. He's looking at biology, he's looking at neuroscience, he's looking at psychology, and he's even dabbling in philosophy as well for this book. And he's merging all of these together to tell his audience, or you, for example, right? What he's learned and how to deal with a 4-step model of habits, which is what we're going to be looking at.
Yeah. So the backbone of this book is the 4-step model of habits, which are cue, craving, response, and reward. And James Clear writes, readers with a psychology background will recognize some of these terms because they come from operant conditioning, which was first proposed as stimulus response reward by B.F. Skinner in 1930s. And of course, they've been popularized more recently as cue, routine, and reward in Power of Habits by Charles Duhigg. So as we move into the next chapters, you will see how you can weaponize these 4 laws of small habits in your own benefit and become much more in control of how things impact your behavior or trigger your behavior, and how you can use that in order to eventually fulfill your own potential. Behavioral scientists like Skinner realized that if you offered the right reward or punishment pathway, you could get people to act in certain ways. But of course, that's not what we're entirely interested in, because that only explains the external stimuli which influence our behaviors. So, what this book offers is a framework that integrates cognitive and behavioral sciences in order to come up with a model that the audience can follow. He also says human behavior is always changing, situation to situation, moment to moment, second to second. But the book is about what doesn't change. It's about the fundamentals of human behavior, the lasting principles that the audience can rely on year after year. So the ideas that we will teach you through the fundamentals within this book is ideas that can lead you to building a successful framework and model of life.
So let's start looking at chapter 1. The fate of British cycling.
So tell me about the fate of British cycling.
Yeah, one day in 2003, hired some new dude, Dave Brailsford.
Mm-hmm.
So normally, the British were really bad at cycling. In the Olympic Games, they had only won a single gold medal, like in 1908. Like, they only won one gold medal since then. And the Tour de France, they also were really bad. No British cyclists had ever won the event. So, like, it was so bad that, like, manufacturers wouldn't sell bicycles to the team because they were really bad. It would hurt their sales if, like, the Brits used it because they suck. So Brailsford was like the pioneer of British cycling. He made him different. He did a bunch of reforms in the system, in the way that he coached his team. And what he did was he introduced this idea of, like, well, he didn't introduce it, but he introduced this idea to the cyclists, which is like, he called it marginal gains, aggregation of marginal gains.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like, if you have to, like, imagine all of the improvements that you're doing and, like, breaking them down, like saying that this is, like, how if I'm doing something good every day, we're going to say that we're going to increase it by 1%. So basically, like, if we take what goes into, riding a bike, or in James Clear's case, anything, and you improve it by 1% every day, and you put that all together, it's going to be huge.
Just to put it into context, if you ask the general public and you tell them, how much will you improve over a year if you increase your performance by 1%? They would assume that they would improve by 365%. Is that right?
Yes.
Wrong. Because the actual improvement is 3,700%. So you would improve by 37 times. And that's because of compounding. Because your 1% compounds on your 1% and then compounds on your 1%. So some of the ways that the British cycling team was able to find these marginal improvements was through better racing suits that were tested in the wind tunnel to see if they performed better or not. And they were hiring people such as surgeons to show them how to wash their hands in order to not catch any colds, right? They tried different pillows and mattresses that led to better night sleeps. And these things went on and on and on until in 2008 Olympic Games in Beijing, the British cycling team won 60% of the gold medals available. And 4 years later, in the Olympic Games in London, the British were able to get 9 Olympic records and 7 world records. And of course, the same year, they won their first Tour de France, and they went on and on to...
So you're saying that hiring that guy was the best coaching investment of like Britain's entire cycling career.
No question, no question. And that's what we can learn from. Not hiring a coach, but those tiny changes, those tiny improvements lead to massive results. And this is where we want to really focus on for today. Because the 1% per day improvement, it follows an exponential trajectory. And with exponential trajectories, what happens is from the start, the improvements are quite insignificant and it's very hard to notice a change. But over time, when they start compounding on each other, then the result will be absolutely enormous. And similarly, if instead of improving 1% a day, you lose 1% per day in performance, then over a year, you would essentially go to zero, because those tiny losses in the beginning don't seem like a lot, but they compound as well.
So we're talking about progress. What is progress really like, right? We're looking at, 1% improvement helps us progress over time. Small habits compound. But what is that progress actually, what is it really like? Luckily, James Clear has already done this analogy for us, and it's actually really good. Come on, Farshad, take it away. What is this great analogy that he's put forward?
The analogy that James Clear uses takes into account the gap between when we start building small habits and these habits start compounding versus when we actually do notice a change. And this is important to take note because everyone thinks that change happens over time, but it's not like that. Change happens as a result of a series of tiny changes. And if you can think of an ice cube sitting in a room that's -5 degrees Celsius, and you take this room and you slowly begin to heat it up, and you go to -4 degrees, and then to -3 degrees, and then to -2 degrees, and then -1. And all this time, your ice cube looks exactly the same. Nothing has changed. And so from the outside, the unbeknown observer would think that nothing is happening, nothing is changing. But we of course know that it takes enormous amount of energy to take that little ice cube from -5 to -1 and then to 0. And even when it's at 0, it's still an ice cube. And so if we were to leave it at that, then nothing would happen. But we're not going to leave it at that because we are in the process and in the business of making tiny changes, because those tiny changes lead to massive results. And what is that massive result? That's when the room goes from -1 to 0 and then to 1. And the moment the temperature goes to 1 degrees, the ice starts melting. And everyone will think that the ice cube started melting right at 1 degrees. But that's not true, because we know it took 5 degrees of temperature change in order to get the ice cube there. And for those of you who are good in chemistry, then you know the heat capacity of ice, and you multiply that by the change in temperature, and you get the exact number of joules of energy it's required to take the ice and melt it. But we're not in the chemistry class, and we're not about to have a midterm here, so let's move on. What I'm trying to say is the energy that is being used during the time that we're not seeing a difference, this is called the plateau of latent potential. And during this time, this plateau of latent potential creates a gap between the exponential growth that is experienced by tiny changes and the expected growth that would be expected by the person if they were on a linear path of growth. And this is called the Vally of Disappointment. And most people give up in the Valley of Disappointment. But you have to realize, when an earthquake of magnitude 9 happens, it happens not overnight, not in an instant, but over centuries and sometimes millennials of slow moving tectonic plates. And once those plates snap, then you've got enough energy to power an entire continent.
But wouldn't the snap like happen in an instant though? What do you mean by the plateau of? You get what I mean?
Yes, of course.
Feel
You
like-
make a great point, because the plateau of latent potential is the time that you're inputting energy into your system, and the system, and this is sounding more like a chemistry class now, but
It really is.
you're inputting energy into your system. And what is the system? The system is you changing your habits for the better, making small improvements here and there in order to get yourself to a better result. That better result comes not despite of those tiny changes, but because of the tiny changes.
So about that snap. So is it like, would that be just like, let's say our graph of improvement, right? It's kind of like an exponential graph, right? Like it slowly goes up, but when the slope reaches this really nice, you know what I mean? The when it reaches that point, right, when the slope is huge and it just kind of like, that's kind of the snap, the sudden of the 9 magnitude.
I tell you exactly where the snap occurs.
Tell me exactly.
The snap occurs where if you were on a linear trajectory of growth and you were expecting linear improvements in yourself, then it would take an X amount of time to reach that point. But on an exponential chart, you will reach the same point much, much faster. And the moment you overshoot the linear chart, you cross the linear path, the linear expected path, much sooner than expected. That's where the snap happens. One of my mentors actually said a great thing to me once. He said, always underestimate what you can do in a year and overestimate what you can do in 10 years. That's because in 1 year, you're doing a lot of things, but you expect things to happen overnight. That's not going to happen. You're just putting in place systems that will help you reach goals.
Right. Well, I got a question. Okay.
Yes.
Want to hear my question?
Of course.
All right. So, you know this nice little exponential graph, and there's this tiny little, like it starts off really slow. Now, I'm gonna just put this take a little personal spin on this. Like I've been pretty low mental health wise, and I've been finding trouble myself at least to do like basic tasks like brush my teeth, take a shower, take care of myself. And it's like, if I put these habits in, when's the point when someone like me who's dealing with something similar is going to get like motivated to get to because like what it's saying and it makes sense, like the point is going to happen eventually, but how am I going to stay motivated? How is that going to come about? How long am I going to stay doing these habits, right?
That is the perfect transition, and we are going to leave that for the next episode. So in the next episode, we'll discuss exactly how you can stay motivated and how tiny changes can help you get yourself to your intended destination without losing motivation. And with that said, this has been Farshad.
And this has been Maya. Stay tuned for the next episode. See you guys.